There's no easier way to say this, but this man, Peter Sculley, is the world's worst pedophile. From child trafficking to dark web video hosting, this monstrous father of two has destroyed the lives of many across the Philippines. What you're about to see is a dark tale of sex trafficking at its absolute worst. This is the story of how Peter Sculley, the world's worst pedophile, got 129 years in jail. From the suburb of Warren in Melbourne comes Peter Sculley, who fled to the Philippines in 2011. The reason? He was evading 117 fraud and deception charges of his involvement in a real estate scam that cost investors around 2.6 million Australian dollars. Another reason that he chose the Philippines was that he was running an unlicensed online escort service with his Filipina girlfriend. Business wasn't exactly booming for the pair, as the Philippines had a lot of sex workers and escort services to compete against. So they decided to up the ante and build something worse for themselves. He had built an international child sexual abuse ring, offering pay-per-view video streams of children being sexually abused and tortured to depraved individuals across the globe. This island of Mindanao was his playground, a place where he could find impoverished families desperate for work or education and exploit their children for profit. Sculley had no remorse for the harm he caused to innocent children. In fact, he relished in their suffering, often personally participating in their abuse. But this twisted operation needed more corrupt minds, so he recruited two female accomplices, Carmen Alvarez and Lizard Margallo Castaña. They helped him procure victims, promising a better life to unsuspecting families and then subjecting their children to unspeakable horrors. Margallo, 28, was hired by Sculley as a prostitute, but soon became an accomplice to his crimes. She lived a life of luxury, spending the money Sculley made from selling vile child pornography on designer labels and expensive trips. Alvarez was believed to have become Sculley's girlfriend when she was just a 14-year-old prostitute. But the horrors didn't end there. In one of the most chilling instances of Sculley's abuse, he and his girlfriend, Carmen Alvarez, coaxed two teenage girls to come to his house with the promise of food. Once they arrived, he gave them alcohol and forced them to perform sex acts on each other, all while filming the scene. When the girls tried to escape, Sculley forced them to dig graves in the basement of the house, threatening to bury them alive. She offered food and shelter to young girls whom Sculley raped and tortured, making them wear dog collars and chains. It wasn't until Alvarez began feeling remorse after seeing the two girls in pet collars that she reported what had happened to the authorities. But before Alvarez's guilty conscience kicked in, Sculley had already done the worst. His acts remained untraceable because it was all published on a dark website called No Limits Fun. The content from this website was straight out of a nightmare, some of which was sold to pedophiles who paid between $100 to $10,000 for the videos. His most notorious video was a multi-part series released in 2012 called Daisy's Destruction, which was so extreme that it was once thought to be an urban legend. In this video, Sculley and two Filipino women tortured and raped three young girls, including one named Barbie, who had been taken from her family at the age of 5 by Sculley's cohort, Lizard Margallo. During this filming, Margallo, who was once trafficked as a child herself, was urged by Sculley to commit some of the most severe physical abuse against the children. One of the reporters from 60 Minutes Australia had a word with one of the child survivors who shared her side of the story about the abuse and torture that went on inside this madman's captivity.
The following day after breakfast, we were asked to dig a grave, that we will be buried in the graves that we are digging. While Peter was assaulting me, Carmi Ann told me to shut up, and she covered my face with pillows so I won't scream.
Sculley's despicable acts also drew in other like-minded individuals. such as fellow Australian Matthew David Graham, who ran a series of quote-unquote hurtcore child pornography sites. The footage was so disturbing that it quickly gained the attention of law enforcement and the media, leading to an international manhunt for those responsible for its production. The darkness enveloped everything as Detective Hamoudi and his team sifted through mountains of digital evidence, searching for any trace of the international child sexual abuse ring run by Peter Sculley. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but they persevered, driven by their determination to bring the perpetrators to justice. For the prosecutors who worked on Sculley's case, the trauma of watching children being abused in his hurtcore videos was too much to bear. And yet, they persisted in their pursuit of justice, working with law enforcement agencies around the world to bring Sculley and his accomplices to justice. Australian federal police officer Paul Hopkins joined hands with Filipino investigators to bring down this monster. They went door-knocking, house by house, matching up the interiors of houses with those seen in Sculley's videos. On February 20th, 2015, police filmed the moment that they successfully tracked down Sculley and arrested him. The video shows him wearing a yellow shirt, pinned to the ground, and police announcing that they have 6 warrants out for his arrest. But it was going to take more than 6 warrants to fully uncover the severity of the crimes and the total victim count of Peter Sculley's sex ring. The evidence they gathered against Sculley was devastating. Videos of his unspeakable crimes were the most horrifying things that prosecutor Ruby Malinog had ever seen. She cried as she watched them, and felt like crying again as she talked about them. Sculley was not about to go down without a fight, though. He claimed to be remorseful, but his not guilty plea forced at least 10 of his victims to relive their hellish experiences in court. And even as he stood trial, he continued to operate his dark web empire, exchanging phone calls and texts with his accomplice Margallo before she too was arrested. The case against Sculley was strong, but then came the fire. In October of 2015, a fire severely damaged the evidence room containing Sculley's computer logs and videos, destroying key evidence. Some believe Sculley may have bribed a local police officer, as corruption in the Philippines was rife as of the 2010s. The evidence they had was enough to put Sculley away for life. Sculley faced 75 charges and was alleged to have sexually abused 75 children. He was on trial with 4 other men who assisted in the production of his pornography. Margaret Acuyo, an expert on child abuse investigations, described the case as quote-unquote horrific and the worst she had ever heard of. Some prosecutors supported the reintroduction of the death penalty as punishment for Sculley's crimes, despite capital punishment being abolished in the Philippines in 2006. On the 13th of June 2018, Sculley and his girlfriend Alvarez were sentenced to life in prison. Judge Jose Escobedo also ordered Sculley and Alvarez to pay 5 million Philippine pesos, almost $87,000 to the victims. In November of 2022, Sculley received a second conviction and was sentenced to an additional 129 years in prison. Margallo was sentenced to 126 years, and 2 accomplices, Alexander Lau and Maria Dorothea Chia, were given a 9-year sentence each. In total, there have been 60 cases filed against Sculley. But the victory was a hollow one. The Philippines, where Sculley had operated his vile ring, remained a hub for child abuse and exploitation. Detective Superintendent Paul Hopkins, who had worked on the Sculley case, described the network of child abuse there as quote-unquote monstrous. Sculley was just one head of a repulsive hydra, and cutting off that head had done nothing to stop the network of beasts. While he goes on and on about his journal, no one will be inclined on giving this madman any sympathy for the crimes he's committed. Even in his interviews, his arrogance and ego prevail, leaving no space for remorse. At this point, we're glad he's stuck behind bars in a horrific jail with no ties to the outside world. But we're also concerned for the victims who have to live on with the dark memories of torture, plus the vile pedophilia online network that will prevail long after the jails keep getting filled with more Peter Sculleys. But for now, let's just be glad that the world's worst pedophile has got 128 more years to go in jail.